This is the Standards and Assessment Committee of the Utah Board of Education, and we'll be starting our meeting today. The agenda is on the screen. Right off the bat, I've asked our Vice Chair, Brent Strait, to give us just a brief opening message to get us started this morning.
Thank you, Chairman Hanson. I appreciate that. I've been thinking about the many opportunities that education has given me in my life, and the appreciation I have and the opportunity to serve in this position. As I was thinking about what I'd share today, I thought back to a person who, in history, by the name of Frederick Douglass. Frederick Douglass was born a slave. And when I look at his life, I think of the opportunities that eventually, that eventually education had for him. I want to read a passage from his narrative, which he wrote himself. When he was a young child, he was sent from the plantation to live with a family in Baltimore, Maryland. And upon him arriving there, his mistress and began to teach both her own son and Frederick how to read. This is a reaction as recorded by Frederick Douglass when her husband found out that she was teaching Frederick Douglass, a slave, to read. As to himself, speaking of Frederick Douglass, it could do him no good, but a great deal of harm, and this is in regards to reading. It would make him discontented and unhappy. Now, Frederick Douglass, his words to this were, "These words sank deep into my heart, stirred up sentiments within that lay slumbering, and called into existence an entirely new train of thought. It was a new and special revelation. From that moment, I understood the pathway from slavery to freedom." Education for every one of us has incredible impacts, and providing opportunities for students to learn, for students to grow, and to grow up to be productive citizens of this great nation is the greatest opportunity that we're provided. Thank you.
Appreciate that, Brent. Thank you. And then we have several signed up for public comment today. Is that right?
Yes, there's 3.
I'll let you help us through that then, Nora Lee.
Sure. Okay, we have Tyler Reese, then we have Lyle Mason, and then Anna Alacala.
My email comes through as Tyler Reese, but it's Tiffany Reese because I share my email with my husband.
Thank you. I'll go ahead and correct that. Thank you, Tiffany.
So I just wondered, did you want me to go, or do you have a specific order?
We're going to go Tiffany, Lyle, then Anna, and I believe each of you will have 3 minutes for public comment, and I will let you know when that time is up. So go ahead, Tiffany.
Okay. Thomas Sowell said, "It takes considerable knowledge just to realize the extent of your own ignorance. Anti-racist bias equity training is at the very core of dividing people. It does not unite. It is ignorant to think differently. The 77-page spewing of data shows me no correlation to racist happenings. This testing shows different groups of people and how they test and outcomes due to individual choices being made and strikes at the very background, cultural differences, and demographic differences, but nothing racist in nature. Title I schools will show a major difference in scores than more affluent areas. This is fact. The data shows no correlation in the training that is being pushed and no causal link to anything racist. Every student is given equal opportunity, same teachers, same books and classrooms, of course, different districts and what they approve. And the difference in outcomes lies in the family structure and outside school influences. Booker T. Washington says, a lie doesn't become truth, wrong doesn't become right, and evil doesn't become good just because it is accepted by a majority. Lately, so many have fallen trapped to think that we have to be put in boxes regarding race, making some the oppressed and others the oppressors. This has got to stop. It's harmful. The real majority of Americans are everyday people who love and accept others. Living in America is a privilege, and it shows in the masses of people who want to immigrate into America. Dinesh D'Souza said, it is better to have unequal amounts of prosperity than equal amounts of poverty. To make this statement along education lines, simply put, equal amounts of good grades, dropout rates, suspensions, and more across all demographics will never happen given unequal backgrounds and life circumstances and individual desires and strengths. Asian students outperform white students, and it shows in your data because education is a major priority in their culture. More Asians adults earn more on average than white students, but this has not been a disaster for white people. I will summarize a few points in the article in The Federalist written by David Marcus. Biden has promised to keep a laser focus on equity. Why? Equity concerns itself with outcomes. Equity basically means that it's the job of the government to make sure that little or no disparities exist when comparing the outcomes in different demographic groups. It is insane and dangerous. Proponents of the concept of equity often use graphics or videos that show every person has to have the same starting position. Is that even possible? No. For example, one of the greatest predictors of educational and economic success is two-parent households. And there's no way to ever guarantee that. And individually, some kids have higher IQs, some like music, some do better with greater strength and agility and spatial recognition. To the Black community, proponents of equity say you have no control of your situation, and they argue because of deep-rooted systematic racism. To the Asian community, they say we have to take away control of you because you are doing too well, and then they lose academic opportunities because of affirmative action. Equity is an impossible task. The only economic and political system that even contemplates the possibility is communism. Let's take education back, and please vote no on this training. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay. Now, Lyle, are you ready, Lyle?
Yes, this is Dr. Lyle Mason. The data, which was voluminous to say the least, helped me to draw certain conclusions. Number one, that the primary cause of poor educational performance is poverty, and intergenerational poverty is worse. Therefore, I believe we should concentrate our efforts on decreasing poverty in society generally. The ethnic groups into which people are separated are, I believe, in one respect, misnomers. We are nearly all of mixed race. African Americans are 24% of European extraction. Latinos are 65% of European extraction. We are not that different. We are all of mixed race. We should emphasize our commonality rather than our differences in the educational system. The data shows that virtually any impediment to learning, such as separation from society generally, as with Native Americans, or learning English as a second language, causes problems and needs special attention. We should concentrate on those areas where possible. The data, as it was presented, is somewhat discordant. It does not show areas, whether the information came from areas of poverty or affluence, rural or urban. This makes comparisons difficult as to causation of poor or better or good performance of the students. As previously noted, Asians do better generally than other groups. We should study their system, and we should try to emulate what they do to make their students do better. The data, in my opinion, did not demonstrate any institutional bias in society or in the educational system. Therefore, I would see no reason for racial bias training generally in schools. In my opinion, we should emphasize our sameness, not our differences. Thank you for the opportunity to speak.
Thank you. Okay, do we have Anna? I don't see her on the list. Does anybody else see her? Hey, she would be the last one. I don't see her on here. Chair Hansen, I think you're good to go.
Okay, yeah, I'm just scrolling through as well and I don't see her. Thank you to those who provided that thoughtful comment to us this morning. Let's
Thank you.
Let's look now at the first item on our list for today. And we have an information item with regard to recognition of progress, achievements, or improvement. And I think, Patty, is that one yours?
It is. Thank you, Chair. And thank you for letting us present this today. I know the other committees have been doing this for a while, so I thank you for letting us do this as well. The Utah State Board of Education is committed to the vision of upon completion, all Utah students are prepared to succeed and lead by having the knowledge and skills to learn, engage civically, and lead meaningful lives. So in order to accomplish these goals, staff of the board are engaged in supporting the everyday work to achieve this goal, in assisting the board to create these equitable conditions for student success, advocating for necessary resources, developing policy, and providing effective oversight and support. So this month, we're going to highlight 3 areas that really deserve recognition. The first of these areas is the fact that in 48 hours, the child nutrition program went from normalcy to all hands on deck to make sure that all children received meals during March of 2020 to this day. The team identified solutions to overcome logistical hurdles to ensure that there was not a disruption in meal services for the children of Utah. And since March of 2020, the USDA has passed over 70 plus waivers to help the LEAs. But with this, USBE's CNP still worked to make sure all of the compliance and integrity was being followed. This is a huge job. April came, and then again, an all hands on deck again for this program between the Department of Workforce Services and CNP. Department of Workforce Services and CNP quickly developed a partnership to get this new program going during COVID-19, and it was called the PEBT, to provide the EBT, or that's actually referred to as the electronic balance transfer cards for students that could not access meals. Therefore, I'd like to recognize the whole CNP team for all that they had done during this unprecedented times to help support our LEAs in making sure that all children in the state of Utah receive meals during these times. Second, I know that that's just that one piece alone is enough for this meeting, but we have 2 more incredible outputs that I'd like to share with you as well. Second is we'd like to share that Cami Dupree, who's one of our education development specialists, has facilitated the release of Educator Induction Framework and Guidebook. She has done a masterful job to include stakeholders in this development, and it incorporates the professional learning standards and concrete examples of what this would look like in practice. I just wanted to share that the great work Cami has accomplished and it's also been a long time since such high levels of support from the field in the space of mentoring and induction. Thank you, Cami. And if you look within the agenda items, it will show the links to these as well. So one more that will just make your day is the fact that Sydney Young, thanks to her leadership, we also released the Guide to Education Flexibility in Utah, Empowering Local Innovation for School Systems. This guide brings transparency to flexibility measures that are available at the local level, clarity regarding when a waiver request may be appropriate, and an awareness of where flexibility may be limited or not possible. This is a great resource as our schools and districts and charters move towards achieving the board's strategic goals related to personalized learning and teaching. So thank you to Sid for their thorough research, analysis, and clear guidance that this document offers to LEAs in considering the opportunities that they have for personalized learning for their own students. I'd like to again thank the chair and this committee for providing this time to highlight the work and effort what staff is doing. Thank you.
Can you hear me? I've lost audio on my side, but I can still read the closed captions at the bottom, so.
Yes, I can hear you.
Okay, I'll go ahead. I can't hear what you're saying, though. I can only see it on my screen. I guess the internet is getting a little sketchy with the storm. Thank you for that recognition, and thanks to Cammie and Sydney for all that they're doing for us. We appreciate that and look forward to that coming up each month. We'll move now to the next item that we have on our agenda. This is the pre-K-12 English Language Arts Standards Revision Update. And I am getting unstable internet. So Brent, you may have to take over if I just drop off the screen, but that's, oh, I can hear you now. Good. But we can go to that next item.
Well, before we go, Scott, may I ask a question of about the induction manual?
Oh, sure. I'm sorry, Janet. I didn't anticipate questions on the recognition part.
Well, you know, this just occurred to me, and I looked through it briefly, but not in depth. And as Patty was telling us about it, I just wondered, is there anything in that induction handbook that relates to training teachers or giving them some kind of insight on how to handle special education kids that are mainstreamed in the classroom? I know this has been an ongoing concern for a lot of us, you know, that as we loosened the requirements around teacher licenses, that teachers have some kind of background in how to handle special ed kids. And I just wondered if the induction manual addresses that at all.
Chair, may I?
Please.
Okay, I think that we have Cammie on here, and I should have had them turn on their cameras to at least let you know who they were. So if Cammie and Sid Young and if any of the CNP team are on here, it'd be great if you could just turn your cameras on and wave hi so people can see who that you are. But we have Lea Voorhees on here if Cammie is not available to answer that question. So Lea.
Hello, Chair. Can you hear me?
Yes, I'm doing good now. I hope everyone else is, but good morning, Lea.
Okay, great. My computer is currently not working. Keith is working on it for me, so I'm on my phone, but I'm happy to join you. I'm Lea Voorhees. I'm the Assistant Superintendent of Student Support. And Cammie did work with special education in the process to create this manual. She actually did focus groups all over the state, and special ed teachers participated. One particular focus group was specific to special education, so that we could consider the needs of all students. Cammie did an amazing job with this project, collaborating with all stakeholders, considering the needs of all new teachers in classrooms. Of course, to Board Member Cannon's point, of course, there is always more that we can do, but we're already working on it. We have a list, and Jennifer Thronson and I have a collaboration going with 8 of the higher education, our higher education partners, the universities that have educator preparation programs, to create an endorsement specific for any educator to get that would be specific to helping struggling learners, including students with disabilities, including students learning English, including students that just need more support. So we have several things that we are working on to address that very important point, Board Member Cannon. And I just, I want to emphasize that Cammie did an amazing job, including all stakeholders, and really with the limited scope of the project to provide new teachers with as much information that they need right when they start in the classroom. Thank you for the question.
Thank you for the answer.
Does that answer your questions then, Janet?
Yes, thank you.
Okay, and it looks like Jenny's got her hand up as well.
Yeah, I have a question on this as well. Hopefully, I am a little nervous about the weather here. I don't know if that's what's going on in your area, Scott, and I'm hoping we occasionally do have a power outage if we end up with a lot of snow. So I'm hoping that doesn't happen today. My question so I actually have a master's degree in special education. I got it years and years ago. So it was, I think as we were first, this dialogue of trying to include students with disabilities back into the classroom and trying, anyways, that was years ago. But so my question is this, so if an educator wanted to get more information, for example, they have maybe 2 autistic children with autism that come into their classroom, and they haven't actually worked with children with autism before. Are there places that they can go that USB has that they can go do like micro training, or I guess really a district would handle that for the most part, but is there just some basic training that they can receive in some of these special areas? And I guess that's really what the intent is behind this, what the induction or whatever, that we're addressing those needs. So Lea, is there anything there that if there was an additional information that someone wanted as an educator, they could get that?
Chair, would you like me to respond?
Yes, please.
Thank you. So, so we have quite a few resources. We don't, like you say, the LEA, the district or charter school that is responsible for the implementation of the IEP, is also responsible for the training of the providers who are providing services and supports on that IEP. So we provide resources to those LEAs. We have a training request portal where any LEA can submit a request for training to the student support section, not just related to special education, but related to anything that we do in student support. And then all of the coordinators review that request, talk to the requester, determine how we can best meet those needs. We have webinars that are pre-created that are available. We have PowerPoint presentations that are pre-created that are available. We have on the phone technical assistance when it's appropriate and safe and healthy. We have in-person technical assistance. And we do data analysis on the requests that we get and the use of the webinars, the PowerPoint presentations that an LEA can take and then use with their own team on the training that we provide. We do data analysis, and if we have a great number of requests in one certain area, like your question, Board Member Earl, to support students with autism, then we create something. If there's enough requests, then we create a statewide training, or we create a new webinar, or we create a new module to be able to provide for that need. But we do have quite a few pre-packaged, pre-recorded, and pre-created, developed trainings that are available. And then we have on the spot, call us, actually, email using the training request portal and tell us what your need is, let us talk to you about it and find out if that's something that we haven't addressed yet, and we'll come to you and address it. Or if it is something we have addressed, we'll send you the links to the training that we already have available. And if it's something that we hear from multiple LEAs, we'll create something.
Okay, thank you. I just wanted to, that just brought up when Janet was asking her questions, it brought up that thought in my mind, especially with the data we're reviewing today, making sure we're getting resources to our educators and those in need. So thank you for articulating that.
And thank you for asking the question so I could make that explicit so that everyone hears about our training request portal. It's super helpful. We review the requests every Wednesday morning, and we have between 6 and 10 requests per week. So that's the number that are coming in from the LEAs that we're addressing every week. And that's for actual training. The technical assistance calls that we get are probably that many a day. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, and I appreciate this dialogue. I just wanted to add that we've talked about the induction guidebook, but that guide to education flexibility, as I look through that, that is really a needed document. And we have so many things that I guess are not in the interest of flexibility as far as rules and laws that need to be complied with. And I really think that that provides a good guide in helping teachers to understand where they can exercise some creativity, how they can get things approved if they want to do something a little bit out of the box. And really, that's a valuable document. So thank you for both of those documents. Is there anything else on these subjects? Now we will move on then to the next item on our agenda. That one is an information item on the pre-K-12 English Language Arts Standards Revision. And it looks like we'll be hearing from Sarah and Naomi, is that right?
Yes, thank you, Chair. Sarah Wibke, Pre-K through 12 Literacy and Library Media Coordinator, Utah State Board of Education. Thanks so much for having me. I'm excited because the writing committee for ELA standards is super diverse and just such a great group. They've brought so many wonderful thoughts and ideas to really improve our standards. So at this time, we've only had one meeting. We have another one coming up very shortly. During that time, we spent the time talking about, we introduced ourselves obviously, but also spent the time thinking about what this process looks like, what it entails, the timeline, just so everyone's sort of on the same page of where we're going. And then we also spent some time looking at very important documents like our current standards, other state standards that have been rewritten recently, as well as like the portrait of the graduate. We want to make sure we're keeping all of those things in mind when we're looking at these things. We also had a lengthy conversation around grade banding, especially in the secondary setting. At this time, grades 9 and 10 are banded at 11 and 12. And so the discussion was around grade banding 7 and 8 as the standards are similar, but keeping 6th grade out. And the group really determined that keeping 6th grade out was important, as in Utah, we have 6th grade in an elementary setting as well as a secondary setting. And if it was banded, that could potentially cause some barriers and issues for our elementary schools where 6th grade is included, and we didn't want that to happen. So it was a great discussion though. And as you can see on our writing committee, we have a long list of varied groups of people. And then below that, hopefully you also could see our approximate timeline for moving forward in this realm. And I'm happy to answer any questions if you have them.
So just a couple of things that I saw, and it looks like questions. It looks like if things go well, we'll be seeing you sometime in the late spring, June, July timeframe. Is that correct? Back
yes.
with a draft for us. Also, I was excited to see our own Jennifer Graviot there as a member of the committee. So it's good to see that she still got that connection.
She was very excited to be a part of the group.
Looks like we've got board member. Please go ahead, Jenny.
Okay, I was going to say you kind of dropped off there, so I wasn't sure if you said, I know that Janet Cannon had her hand raised just a second ago. I have a couple questions.
I just wanted to say hooray that Jenny's on the committee. That was my comment. And then Scott acknowledged that as well. So thank you.
I have just a couple questions. One of those deals specifically with when you talk about grade banding, and I have a pretty good idea what that is, but can you be more specific? What is the intent behind grade banding? How do you organize grade banding? And what are maybe the benefits? What are also the drawbacks of that? Because I think it's important to know, both sides of that. Would you mind just sharing a little bit about that?
Chair, would it be all right if I answered that?
Yes, please go ahead.
And I actually would like to invite Naomi Watkins to speak more about that. She is from a secondary background and probably has some nuances to share that I may not be aware of. So I will let Naomi respond.
Hi, Naomi Watkins, secondary ELA specialist. So like Sarah explained, it's currently banded as 11 and 12 and 9. And then 6, 7, and 8 have been separate. And if you look at the standards, there's like just little slight word changes between each of those grade levels. And our teachers often have a hard time distinguishing between what does 6th grade mean versus 7th grade. And since we are really focused on making sure that there's a complexity of text taught, a diverse set of text taught with these different skills, we found that banding those grade levels together really means that there's kind of an extension of and more allowance for depth of teaching those skills. So to be consistent with the secondary setting, the review committee and now even the writing committee has really been on board with also banding 7th and 8th to be consistent with 9, 10, and 11 and 12. I hope if you have more questions about that, but that's kind of a
yeah, so I guess what I'm trying to understand is just like, I mean, math, you learn this, it's a progressive thing. And I would think that writing and then reading would be progressive in nature too. So I guess I'm trying to differentiate between that progressive nature that naturally takes place as you move from grade to grade and banding. Are there certain, so I guess, I don't know, I'm still not sure what banding is. You're going to band 2 grades together, right? Or 3 grades together. So I'm trying to understand how that's different than a natural progression that would take place in, you know, in writing or reading. Is there a way to differentiate that? Because clearly this is a different term than has, you know, anyways, if you can explain that a little further, I'd appreciate it.
So the language arts standards are a little different than math in that I see them more as a spiraling than just a layering of skills, if that makes sense. So, you know, all of us, I mean, I still sometimes, there's texts that are really complex for me. And so by the spiraling, I'm meaning that we come back to certain skills, but with a different type of text or a more complex layer of text, right? That I may struggle now with using that skill applied to this more complex text, whereas I may not have had before. So,
so it's recirculating it. So it's a skill that you then come back to several times. Is that correct? Is that what I'm
yes, as opposed to like one and done, okay. Right? Like I might be able to analyze a certain text at a certain level, but when faced with the more complex text, I might be able to have more difficulty applying that skill. So that mastery is a spiral as opposed to just like a one and done versus like I know my multiplication tables and I can tell that to you.
Okay, I think I have a better understanding. Maybe I'll have to do a little bit more research on this myself so I thoroughly understand exactly what that means. My other question I have to ask has to do with, so I'm just sharing my experience. When I was in high school, we studied a lot of Bob Dylan lyrics. Now, I'm not really sure whether that was rich literature or not, I guess depending on whether you like Bob Dylan. And I'm not, you know, Mr. Davis, you know, that was his preference. I really want these kids to have some rich literature and not just some kind of a movement. Does that make sense? There is such rich literature. How are we working towards that rich literature? And I think it's the same with history. Rich historical literature really engages the mind and allows questions where people do deeper dives and have a deeper understanding. I would love if there was, as we're pushing this direction, that we have really rich literature that has some in-depth analysis, and that can be done at the younger grades too. Anyways, I guess I'm telling you my preference, and that we maybe avoid the Bob Dylan lyrics for now, as wonderful as it is, but it was a time and a personal preference versus a more diverse look at quality literature. Anyways, that's maybe a comment more than a question, so to speak, but.
Okay, thank you. Were there any other questions, comments on this item? Before we move on, I have to show you. This was my Christmas present a year or so ago. So.
You must have taken Mr. Davis's class, I'm sure of it. I was not I didn't love Bob Dylan, but hey.
Yeah, maybe a kindred spirit, I'm not sure. Anyway, we'll thank you very much for that, and we look forward to hearing back on the ELA standards here in a few months. Hopefully, we'll get an update in the middle somewhere to let us know if you're on schedule, if things are tracking the way that we want them to. But we appreciate the team that's come together to work on that. We will move on then to our next item, which is the access recommendation. Let me see. Oh, sorry, it's not number 3. The alternate achievement science standards will be the next item. And I believe this one is Lea, is that right? Oh, let's see, Lea and Tanya have this one.
Correct.
Okay.
Good morning. Good morning,
Go ahead,
Chair.
Tanya.
Yeah. Good morning, Chair and board members. I'll take it. And then, of course, if Lea has anything to add, that would be fantastic. Just a quick recap. The Individuals with Disabilities Education Act requires that we have what we call alternate achievement standards for students with significant cognitive disabilities. And so we're talking about currently, that's in our state right now is about 0.8% of students. So with really significant cognitive and adaptive disabilities. So we have to have these standards, which, just so you know, are directly tied to the standards that their peers are accessing for science, mathematics, and English language arts, which we are talking a lot about inclusion these days. And this is one of the things that I cheerlead for is that this is the access to standards that their peers are experiencing and learning through. Giving them standards that are reduced and accessible is part of inclusion. So that's just a little bit of a recap. We have adopted standards for DLM through dynamic learning maps for English language arts, mathematics, and science, which is exciting. But there are a few seed standards that were approved through the board that are Utah specific and are not covered through the DLM standards. And so if some of you might recall, I know Vice Chair Straight, you weren't here then, but I think the rest of you were here, that in the summer we approved that we would adopt the science standards and that you would approve for us to pull together and do a revisions process for those few seed standards that are Utah specific. So to get to the point, our action request today is that you, as a committee, recommend that we could start on step 6 of the standards process because we are writing standards that are directly aligned to standards that have already been approved. So to start on step 1 doesn't actually make sense because we're taking standards that are already written and just reducing them. That's kind of what we're doing in a nutshell, and I'm happy to answer questions.
And it looks like we have a couple. I can't see everyone on my screen right now, but I can see that Janet's got her hand up. And so we'll go to her first.
Okay, Chair, I would just like to put the motion on the floor that the committee approve USBA staff to begin working on step 6 of the standards revisions process to convene a stakeholder group to write Utah alternative science achievement science standards that aren't covered by the dynamic learning map. That was kind of a mouthful.
Thank you. Board Member Cannon, I hope that Nora Lee's got that written down for us.
Yes.
Okay, very good. So we do have a motion. Is there any discussion to that motion?
Chair,
Yes.
this is Laura. It just would be helpful if they'd put the motion up while she's reading it, just so we can see it. It's hard to toggle.
Okay, I think Nora Lee can help us with that. Do you have it typed out, Nora Lee? And can we get your screen on the shared here?
Oh, thank you.
Okay, let me see.
Nor Lea, I have it pulled up from Civic Clerk on the screen.
I appreciate it. Thank you. I'm like, I need to have rights. Thank you, Jeff.
Okay. Very good, then. We have that on the screen, and it looks like we've got Board Member Earl with her hand up. You could go ahead with your questions.
Okay, I have maybe a couple questions, comments. I hope this is relevant now that we've got something on the table. Is it? I guess it's okay to ask a few questions around this.
That's the motion, and I believe that any questions.
I'll try to stay in the realm of the motion. I did have a couple questions before the motion, but that's okay. Specifically with this, it looks to me like, and this is a concern I've had, and maybe I didn't even voice this with the language arts, but this move to national curriculum, national standards kind of a thing. And so even in this case, we compared the items missing from the national science standards to decide what we're going to move forward on this. And I'm in complete agreement that this is the direction we should go. But my concern is, even with our standards, is we are tying ourselves to national standards. And that is a really concerning direction. I guess maybe this is a voice for standards as we're moving forward. If we need to keep those standards maybe sovereign to our state so that we can change those as we need to, and we're not part of a national movement, but we're part of a Utah, So anyways, I would speak in support of this. And I do think it's wise not to have to go through the whole process for a handful of standards that need to be aligned. I'm very appreciative of staff to making sure that we are able to get students who have severe disabilities those very basic things that meet these standards so that they can be in the class and they can be included. I have a nephew in high school who falls into this category, and it's so rewarding for him to be part of his class and only, but have these specific things to meet. So thank you for the work you do. Thanks.
Maybe I could ask, just as a follow-up to that, and Tanya or Lea, if you could help us understand how the dynamic learning maps alternative standards were adopted by the board, maybe the history on that, because we have brought that in for this particular group. Could you help us with that?
Yes, Chair and Lea, if you're okay, I'll go ahead and do my best to answer that. The actual English language arts and mathematics standards were adopted, I believe, in 2009. So it's been a while, but Utah was a big part of writing those standards. And what I mean by that, it was a grant, and they pulled in certain states. And so when it came to writing mathematics and ELA standards, Utah was right there at the table. And again, we are looking at, and I don't want to speak on writing the core standards to what Jenny was addressing, because I've not really been a part of that process. But I do know that they don't just say, here's the national standards, we're going to stamp them. They do nuance them a bit when they're writing the standards. And so what USBE did, and I was not a part of that group at the time when they did mathematics and ELA, they looked at what we had adopted and made sure that, or for our core standards, and made sure that what DLM was doing and writing for were directly aligned. And again, it's reduced. And so when we're talking about inclusion and equity, they are accessing the standards as their peer, the same standards as their peers. They're just reduced. And so the science was a little bit of a different story. We just adopted those in July. We brought together a stakeholder committee to look at the science alternate achievement standards and make a determination whether we want to write our own or we wanted to adopt DLMs. And the recommendation that committee through me brought to the board was that DLM covers what we want to, except for these these specific seed standards. And so we asked you all, can we adopt the DLM science standards and then write for these other few standards? I hope that answers your question, but I can give you more detail if you need.
I think that answers. So right now, the motion is to adopt the DLM alternative science standards and to add these additional ones. Is that correct? Is that the action?
Sorry, Chair Hansen, if I can speak to that. We've already adopted the bulk of DLM, their science standards. We just need to write a few more to make sure that, again, that we have equity for our students, because there are some Utah specific seed standards that are not included in the DLM standards, which we've adopted.
Thank you, that clarifies. I thought that we had adopted the DLM basic standards.
Yes.
Okay. All we're doing now is we're doing those specific seed standards.
And specifically asking you, can we start on step 6 rather than step 1? You guys all approved, yes, you can write these, but as we as a committee and stakeholders looked at it, it really doesn't seem to make sense to start on step 1 because we're writing the standards that were written and started on step 1.
Okay, very good. One, probably very apparent to everyone, but there's also an assessment that goes with these, right? So the kids are assessed on an assessment that matches these standards. And is that developed in conjunction with the standards, or is that a separate effort?
So I'm not the authority on assessment, but yes, we also have contracted with DLM to assess the alternate achievement standards for mathematics, science, and English language arts. These would not be, these specific seed standards would be more for instruction and not assessment through DLM's alternate achievement or alternate assessment.
Okay, looks like we have another question that's come up. Board Member Earl, will come back to you.
Yeah, just let me make sure, let me articulate this. So with the DLM, which is aligned to the national science standards, it was easy to adopt that because it was already in alignment with what Utah had already used for their standards. These items are novel, they fall outside of the national standards. And so therefore we need a specific standard for them. Would that be, is it an accurate? Okay, thank you.
Okay, any other comment? Oh, looks like Laura popped up with her hand up. Board Member Belknap.
Thank you, Chair. Would it be better than having this come back every time the DLM needs to do this, to basically set this as the standard across the board for our alternative standards to start at step 6? Rather than keep bringing these back every time?
Chair Hansen, are you okay if I speak to that really quick?
Please, if you would, please.
Yes, so yes, I think we talked about that in a recent meeting, and I am working with Lea and some of our other team members to bring to you sort of what we would consider a revisions process that follows what the board has already laid out, but tweaks it a little bit for alternate achievement standards. So that so it will follow the same thing, but we make sure that it makes sense, right? We're working on it.
Thank you.
Sounds like great minds think alike, and this is a repetitive process. I think it makes sense just to adjust our process so that we're doing it that way and we don't have to come back and address things each time. So we'll look forward to hearing from you in the future on that revised process. Anything else on this one? If not, I think it's time to vote. Brent's got a thumbs up. Is that just your approval of what we're doing on the
Laura's comment? So that's a thumbs up. I agree with that.
Okay, very good. We'll go ahead and vote then on this one if everyone can. I'm back, I think. The motion is that the Standards and Assessment Committee forward a recommendation to the board to direct USBE staff to begin working on step 6 of the USBE standards revision process to convene a stakeholder group to write alternative achievement science standards that align with the few Utah-specific science and engineering education SEED standards not addressed in the Dynamic Learning Maps alternative science standards recently adopted by the board. Please go ahead and vote. And Laura, I don't see a vote from you on my screen. Now these are popping up and down. I don't know if I've got, Nora Lee, are you able to get a good count?
All I show is Laura and Janet.
Okay.
I don't see one from Brent, Jenny, or yourself.
Okay, I can see these popping up and then disappearing on my screen. So it looks like I'm an I, Jenny's an I, Brent's an I, Laura, I don't see a vote, and Janet, I don't see.
Laura and Janet is yes.
Okay, very good. Looks like that one passes unanimously. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, staff, for helping us through that one. Now we'll move on to next item on the list, which is agenda item number 4, I believe. And I think Casey is here to help us with this one. Is that correct?
Chair, I was going to start it off to begin.
Okay, we'll let Patty take the controls in for a moment. We'll get into this item. Please go ahead.
Sorry, Chair, for that interruption. But thank you, Chair and Committee. Again, my name is Patty Norman, Deputy Superintendent of Student Achievement. We'd like to frame this discussion with the words and the work of the board so far. So first, relating it back to the USBE vision, which states that all Utah students are prepared to succeed and lead by having the knowledge and skills to learn, engage civically, and lead meaningful lives, which is further supported by the USBE mission, which is to lead by creating equitable conditions for student success, advocating for necessary resources, developing and providing effective oversight and support. Next, the board went on and they further support these conversations as it recently passed the resolution denouncing racism and embracing equity, which states that all of our policies, programs, and activities shall promote unity and civility among diverse groups. The Utah State Board of Education commits to identify and examine issues of race, ethnicity, and color, and the effect they have on the education system and community to understand and correct any inequities, and recognizes that the starting point of this work of racial equity must be a reflection and internal examination whereby the board will look for ways to engage our members in open and courageous conversations on racism and equity. It further goes on to state with the work that's been done with the portrait of a graduate in stating, we will show respect by acknowledging differences, looking for the good in everyone, and showing due regard for others' feelings, rights, cultures, and traditions. Our actions will demonstrate our belief that we are better when we are together. With these frameworks in mind, the Access Committee recommends accepted for consideration during the January full board meeting. With this, I will now provide a little background on the agenda item today. During its November 2020 board meeting, the board accepted for consideration the recommendations from its advisory committee on equity of educational services for students, also known as Access. In the memorandum supporting underrepresented, historically marginalized, and underserved students. The Standards and Assessment Committee discussed this recommendation number 2 and provided feedback to the board on the next steps. The recommendation number 2 states educators and administrators are provided anti-racist, bias, equity, literacy, professional learning, as well as opportunities to learn about themselves and minoritized groups to raise awareness and promote change within our educational system. The committee then directed staff that instead of just starting here to really create a firm foundation on where we are at in the state of Utah, they directed staff to collect data as it relates to educational opportunities and outcomes and display the individual student numbers behind these population percentages to best identify individual students and their needs and bring this data back to February's committee meeting. This agenda is not advocating on behalf of any particular theory or framework such as critical race theory. Instead, This is about, and USBE also does not choose curriculum at the state level. Local education agencies choose the curriculum that is taught in the schools. So at this point, I'd like to turn the time over to Director of Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion, Casey Dupar, as she leads the USBE team in reviewing the data sets that were asked for. For the sake of being able to understand all of the data sets that are being introduced today, the plan is to have each of these members that are experts in each of their areas to be able to produce, and they already produce, but to be able to speak to their data sets. Casey and the team have done an incredible job of gathering this. It has been an across the agency effort in being able to gather these data sets and then to provide the narrative behind them. I have to say that this has been practiced multiple times, and at first this presentation was well over an hour, and with the work of Casey guiding, we got down to 30 minutes. So we're going to be really structured on the time of having each of those people that are presenting adhere to the 5 minutes, and that would make this presentation 30 minutes. So what we ask is that the questions end at or start at the 30-minute mark, so that then you can have those rich discussions and be able to ask any additional questions, because if we look at our time, we are at about 9 o'clock, which does give us a little under 2 hours because we do have one more agenda item. So Casey, turning it over to you.
Thank you, Deputy Superintendent Norman. Can I have access to share the screen, please? Thank you. Wait, I still don't have permission.
Sorry, just give me 1 second.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone. I'm Casey Dupart. I'm the Director of Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion. Let's see, there, I think I see it now. Lovely. There we are. Okay, so we're going to review some data and I'll kind of give you an outline. So as Deputy Superintendent Norman said, that we're going to go over, in 30 minutes, we're going to cover a lot of data, but we're going to start with academic outcomes. And then we'll go into the student experience. So as you can see, we'll talk about our Acadians, we'll talk about standardized assessments and graduation rates, and we'll talk about intergenerational poverty, but then going into student experience, we'll get into more of that incident data, looking at discipline referrals, as well as, again, intergenerational program participation and then social emotional learning. And with that, I will transition over into Dr. Jimmy Hernandez's area, and he will walk us through Acadians reading.
Thank you, Director of Equity. So in these next two slides, you'll be seeing data, Acadians data, end of the year, from school years 2015, 2016 to school year 2018, 2019. And the first slide looks at demographic groups. So these demographic groups are students who are considered economically disadvantaged. Then you have students who are learning English, and then you have students with disabilities. The yellow line you see, there is the percentage of students that are at benchmark across the state, and then you notice that the groups below that, you'll see that the next group is those who are economically disadvantaged, and then you see the next group is those who are learning English, and then you have those students with disabilities. So as you'll see, the percentage of students in those demographic groups across the years have been steady, and they're way below the state percentage. Next slide, please. Now in this slide, you'll notice that the data is broken up by racial or ethnic groups. So here are all the racial ethnic groups that are represented. Again, you'll notice that the state percentage is represented in this slide is the brown line. So the students, so these are students, early learners in grades 1 through 3. Across the years, they've been around about 72%, 71% are in benchmark at the end of the year. You'll notice that that above the brown line, you have 3 groups. You have students who identify as Asian. you have students who identify as white, and then you have students who are two or more races. Now below the line, the state line, you'll notice that you have what we consider groups who are historically minoritized. The lowest group being students who identify as American Indian.
Thank you, Dr. Hernandez. And with that, we will transition to more of our historical academic outcomes, and I will turn it over to Aaron Bruff.
Thank you, and good morning. Aaron Bruff from Data and Statistics. As we looked at the academic outcomes, we basically went through and said, let's do a gap analysis. And just kind of explaining gap analysis is we're looking for evidence to suggest, if there's evidence suggests that there's barriers to high quality learning opportunities and improving outcomes among the different demographics of the students that we track. So as we go through this information, there's basically three key questions that these gap analysis really focus our questions, if you will, as we move through it. First one is, what are the policies, programs, and practices in Utah that aim to reduce these barriers to high quality learning opportunities and improve outcomes? Again, that's kind of the first question we want to keep in the back of our minds. The second one is there any evidence to suggest that these policies, programs, and practices are effective? And finally, how can we increase equity educational opportunities for all students? So go ahead and to the next slide, please. So for the academic outcomes, we looked at what were the primary academic indicators that we had throughout basically the history of our databases and access to this information. So just kind of going through them, we have the CRTs, which went from 2003 to 2013. These were grades 3 through 12. Then there was a transition to the SAGE assessments, which went from 2014 to 2018. These were grades 3 through 10. Then we transitioned to a new contract and a new assessment called the RISE. Again, this started in 2019. And these were grades 3 through 8. And it was also the introduction of the Utah Aspire Plus assessment, which also started in 2009, which are the 9th and 10th grade assessments. So what we did is we took a look at, go ahead and advance to the next slide, if you don't mind. What we did, and you have in your backups a breakdown of 12 years of the performance of the different student groups. And what I'm showing here is an aggregate or a combination of those 12 years in a single graph. As we looked at it, we said, okay, a 12 years average. So looking at the CRTs, looking at the SAGE data, looking at the RISE data and the Utah Aspire Plus data, could we detect, looking at the different race, ethnicity, and the other risk indicators, could we detect an impact or a difference in the performance? As you can see in this slide, looking at English, language arts, math, and science, and as we're displaying inside of here, we see the effect size that Asians and multiple race students tend to be above the average or above the line at 0.2, 0.1 effect size. And then you can see with the Pacific Islanders, followed by the Hispanic Latino, followed by the African American Black groups, and finally the American Indian groups, that the effect size is on the negative side from a 0.9 to a 1.4, 1.6, you can see down in science. Let's go ahead and move to the next slide. And I'll talk about the numbers in here in a little bit more detail, talk about effect size and how it works. But on this slide, you see that we looked at the other major or main risk indicators that we track. So again, looking at the 12-year average gap, we saw that those who were not identified as low income typically had a 0.5 effect size. On the positive side, those who were identified as low income had again, through the three subjects, -8 to a -9, depending on the subject. The students with disability were marked at -1.9 down to -1.5. And you can see the English learners were a -2.7 to 2.4 in mathematics. Again, this is averaged over the 12 years. And in your backups, you can take a look at each one of those individual years, and we can obviously drill into this into further detail if needed. Let's go ahead and move to the next slide. Let's kind of talk about the effect size and how this works. Effect size is a statistical concept that measures the strength of relationship between two variables on a numeric scale. So for instance, if we have data on the height of men and women, we notice that on average men are taller than women. The importance of the difference between the height of men and the height of women is measured with the effect size. We use Cohen's effect size, which is the difference of the two population means, and it's divided by a standard deviation from this data. Basically, what this means is we can describe the difference between two groups as a small impact, a medium impact, or a large impact. And we try to figure out if this is meaningful. Let's go ahead and move to the next slide. So the greater the effect size, the greater the performance difference between the student groups. This allows us to go beyond testing for statistically significance inside of our data, but actually say, how meaningful is this difference? So again, if we look at the effect size, a 0.2 following Cohen's rule of thumb is considered a small difference. It is a difference, it is statistically significant, but small. A 0.5 or greater is a medium difference, and a 0.8 is considered large. So if I went back to my original example of the heights, for example, if we were measuring the heights between, let's say, between two countries, United States and hypothetically, let's say Indonesia, and we did the effect size difference between the two groups, we would look at what the effect size number was. If it was large, we could then ask the question is what policies, practices, different implementations can you put in place to help adjust the height difference between the two? Simply put, if we're talking about height, we could talk about nutrition, the quality
Excuse
of food.
me, Aaron. I'm gonna chime in for a second. For the sake of time, I'm gonna go ahead and transition to Lea. We're not going anywhere. You will be able to ask questions, but I want to make sure the other specialists have time to speak to their content.
Thank you.
Of course. Just briefly going through graduation rates, and now we'll transition to Lea McElvena.
Okay, go to the next slide, please. Okay, so Utah is involved in or USBE is involved in the Intergenerational Poverty Initiative, along with several other state agencies. There's 4 main focus areas for the initiative. It's education, early childhood development, family economic stability, and health. And USBE annually contributes education data to the IGP report. And this link here will take you to the site where you can read all of those annual reports. Next slide. Okay, so just an overview of the next couple of slides. I'm not going to go over them in detail just in the interest of time. But they show that from kindergarten through graduation, students experiencing intergenerational poverty have substantially worse outcomes compared to the state overall population. Next slide. So first, the kindergarten entry exit profile shows substantial differences. Next slide. Standardized tests. The report includes just 3rd grade and 8th grade, 3rd grade language arts and 8th grade math. This is our 2019 test result comparison. Next page. ACT college admissions test. You can see again, major difference in the percentages of students who meet ACT composite benchmarks. Next slide. And graduation rates. The graduation rate for students experiencing intergenerational poverty is about 12 9 percentage points lower than the all students graduation rate in school year 2019. Next slide. Okay, and then so the next couple of slides look at identification of students as a student with disability by racial ethnic category. And then it also goes into specific disability types by racial ethnic category. This is something we report on annually to the Office of Special Education Programs. And we use a measure called a risk ratio. And that is something that Utah has determined that a risk ratio of greater than 3 is something that will flag as that there's a problem with disproportionality. Overall statewide, our results don't suggest that there's a problem with disproportionality in students of racial ethnic groups being identified as a student with a disability. The risk ratios are all less than 2. However, the numbers when looking at particular disability types do raise concern that there might be some disproportionality in students of particular racial ethnic groups being identified. We have 1 risk ratio that's greater than 3, and we have 3 risk ratios that are greater than 2. However, part of the process for reporting to OSEP every year is reviewing the policies and practices for the LEAs that have risk ratios greater than 3. And our review of their policies and practices has not found any discrimination in the process. Next slide. So this slide kind of gives you an idea of how risk ratios work, what a risk ratio of 0.5, 1, 2, or 3 means. Next slide. This slide gives you the statewide overall risk ratios for identification by racial ethnic group, and you can see that they're all under 2. Next slide. This slide gives you the identification risk for particular disability types, and you can see there are a few that are above 2, so those are the ones that start to raise some red flags. Next slide. And as I said, the review of policies and practices does not suggest that there's any discrimination going on in the policies and practices for identifying students as a particular disability type by racial ethnic group. Next slide.
Okay, thank you, Malia.
You're welcome.
And now we will transition to David Christensen. He'll walk us through incident and discipline data.
Thank you, Casey. Thank you, board members and Chair Hansen for having us. I'm David Christensen, the school safety data analyst. We're now transitioning within the student experience with student discipline data. That is looking at in-school suspensions, out-of-school suspensions, police referrals, and expulsions over the years from 2017 through 2020. So on this first slide, I'm breaking out the school enrollment by race ethnicity group, just to give you a quick snapshot of the total Utah school student population. Students identified as white or Hispanic make up a little more than 90% of the total school population. So in the last 7 years, these two racial ethnic groups have made up, I should say, these students who identify as African American, Black, or Latino make up at least 90% of the student enrollment in the last 7 years. So in other words, the makeup of the vast majority of the school population has remained stable in the last 7 years. Next slide, please. For school year 2020, you'll see the total percentage of school discipline broken out by in-school suspensions, out-of-school suspensions, police referrals, and expulsions by students who identify as the different race and ethnicities. Each of the horizontal bars add up to 100%. So these percentage represent the percentage of total discipline within each discipline category. So for example, in school suspensions, students who identify as white represent 53% of all school suspensions in the blue. Students who identify as Hispanic represent 33% of all in-school suspensions. Students who identify as Native American make up 23% of all expulsions on the bottom bar. From a numbers perspective in 2020, there were about 1,500 police referrals, about 5,600 in-school suspensions, about 12,000 out-of-school suspensions, and 22 expulsions. We're now going to go look at more detailed information on the next few slides. So on this slide, we're looking at just students who identify as Black African American. These students make up roughly 1.5% of the total school population, as shown on the horizontal red line. The vertical bars represent the different school disciplines. I've gone back 4 years to get a sense of any trends. What this chart shows us is that students who identify as Black represent 1.5% of student enrollment, but make up more than 3% of all police referrals and suspensions and 5% of all expulsions. So the next slide, we now look at a similar chart showing students who identify as Hispanic or Latino. They represent roughly 18% of student enrollment, but more than 30% of police referrals and suspensions and more than 40% of expulsions. Next slide. This slide shows students who identify as Native American, who represent roughly 1% of the student enrollment, but more than 4% of police referrals and in-school suspensions. Again, this purple bar on the far right of 23% for the expulsion for Native Americans. I noted here at the beginning that expulsions was about, I think, 22 or 25. And so what this 23% represents is basically five students identify as Native American who were expelled. So on this next slide, we're looking at students who identify as Pacific Islander. They represent roughly 1.5% of student enrollment, but 3% of police referrals. On this next slide, we look at a similar chart showing students who identify as white represent roughly 75% of the student enrollment, but about 50% of police referrals and suspensions. So you'll note here that the red bar representing the enrollment is higher than the vertical bars showing discipline below the 70%. On this next slide, it shows students who do not identify as white. They represent about 25% of the student enrollment, but greater than 45% of all discipline. Now, the final three slides, we're transitioning from students who identify as a certain race and move to students identified in certain demographics. We're going to look at students identified as English learners, students identified in low-income demographic, and students identified in special ed. For this first slide, I'm showing a similar chart showing students identified English learners represent roughly 9% of the student enrollment, but greater than 14% of all discipline. On this next slide, the chart showing students identified as low income represent about 1/3 of student enrollment, but greater than 60% of all discipline. And then my final slide just shows students identified as special ed represent about 14% of student enrollment, but more than 25% of all police referrals and suspensions. So as you can see, these patterns and trends across race, ethnicity, and certain demographics in school discipline are similar to what has previously been shown with Dr. Hernandez's presentation on Acadians, Aaron's presentation on academic testing, and Lea's on intergenerational poverty and students with disabilities.
Thank you, David. Now I will transition to Dr. Wynn Shooter, and he will discuss the SHARP survey.
Thanks, Casey. Thanks, David. Hi, everyone. Wynn Shooter, Data Statistics. Thanks for the opportunity to be here. The section that I'm going to show you first is a few slides from a school safety dashboard that we recently created from Data and Statistics. For those of you who don't know, the Student Health and Risk Prevention, or SHARP survey, is administered statewide every other year by the Utah Department of Human Services, and it's administered to 6th, 8th, 10th, and 12th grade students, and it assesses things like substance use, antisocial behavior, risk, and protective factors. If you want to know more about this SHARP survey, you can go to the Department of Human Services website and read statewide reports, and they also have reports aggregated by some groups and geographic regions as well. Next slide, please. The first two slides I'm going to show you are simple respondent counts for various categories of students. The first table you see there on the left are race and ethnicity categories and counts of respondents to the 2019 SHARP survey. And on the right, you can see the same by grade, 6th through 12th. Next slide, please. This slide will show you counts of various ways that students have described themselves in the survey. Next slide, please. So now I have 3 slides. We'll go through these quick, but each of these 3 slides represent one question from the SHARP survey. And the figure on the left compares students who identify as white, their responses compared to those of all other races. And the figure on the right compares the response of students who identify as Black or African American with all other races. And so just to take a quick look at a few of these, this very first one you can see, this one is, if you've been bullied in the past 12 months, why do you think you were bullied? And so 1.2% of students who identified as white gave the color of their skin as a reason for being bullied, compared to 9.1% of all other races. And to the right, you can see that 29% of students who identified as Black or African American gave the color of their skin as a reason for being bullied, compared to just about 3% of all other races. Next slide, please. This question is, how safe do you feel in each of the following areas at your school? There must have been 10 or 12 of these areas available that students could respond to, and these were the top 3 regardless of race category. Parking lots, bathrooms, and buses, certainly places where adults are perhaps less present. Next slide, please. So this question was, how worried, if at all, are you about the possibility of each of the following things happening at your school? So this assessed feelings of worry, and you could see if we focus just on that first item, gun violence or active shooter situation, again, you can see that 28.6% of students who identified as white had feelings of worry about that topic, compared to 43% of all other races. And to the right, students who identify as Black or African American, 47.5% of them had feelings of worry around gun violence or an active shooter situation, compared to 32.1% of students from all other races. Next slide, please. And we can go ahead one more. So this next section, I'm going to share with you just very brief results, just a little bit from a recent longitudinal study that a few of us conducted from data and statistics. If this is a topic that you're interested in, I'd point you to this report. It's on the agency website. It's a little over 25 pages long. There's a lot of tables in there, a lot of meat to get into. I'm only going to show you just a very little bit here due to the nature of the time that we have. So next slide, please. In this study, we compiled a list of programs that serve students from low-income backgrounds, and we determined the extent to which the students who are affected by IGP were accessing the program. So these are all USBE programs. We found 24 programs that met the criteria that we defined. And of those 24 programs, 12 had data available that we could use at the student level to examine program participation more closely. So like I said, I won't be able to give you all the findings, but I do have 3 slides too that will give you an example of some of the results. And this next slide will show you one of our key findings, that although programs and services were available for students, we can advance.
Dr. Shooter, I'm gonna jump in. I gotta transition to Aaron for the sake of time. All right, thank you. You can see the summary of the program, and with that, I will transition back to Aaron to talk about social and emotional learning.
Thank you. We'll go through this quickly too. But as we're looking at this information, we do have a pilot program running in the state right now for an early warning system. And part of that is the ability for these districts to run a social emotional survey for the students. And so we looked at One example out of Ogden School District, in particular Ogden High School. So number-wise, obviously, we have been talking about this. We've gone from very large now to about 1,000 students that we're looking at. We looked at the social emotional constructs. There's about 13 constructs inside of there. Go ahead and move to the next slide. Obviously, you can read through those in the backup. As we looked at those, we were able to log into the platform and look at the differences of these areas in academic, the attendance behavior, and SEL, or social emotional learning. This is broken down by the grade levels. Go ahead and move to the next slide. We can also take a look at it at student level or at the different distributions or aggregates at the different student groups that we follow. Go ahead and move to the next slide. So as we look at the first one, we looked at the number of strengths from the survey. How many SEL strengths did the students have? So this is an overall just histogram of the information. So a number of students, about 120 were at 0, where you look at the other end where about 11 of them had, about 11 of them had 11 strengths. Go ahead and move to the next slide. So then we took these and we ran some analysis on it and said, let's compare this now. This first one just looked at the economically disadvantaged results. We found that, yes, there was a statistical significance inside of there, and we found the effect size to be about 4.78. So we can see that, yes, that one did have an impact. Go ahead and move to the next slide. We also looked at it for the race ethnicity breakup. And again, we did see that there was a significant relationship on the race, ethnicity, and the performance and the number of strengths that the students were responding in the survey that they had. Let's go ahead and move to the next slide. Then we focused in on one, thank you. We looked at self-efficacy and used this as a proxy for the other constructs inside of there, and because we found it had a strong correlation with the other strengths inside of there, and we just reviewed those likewise as a proxy. Say, is there a disparity? So go ahead and move to the next slide. And again, as we looked at this, the low income definitely had an effect. We can see the effect size is not as large here. It's a 286. But we can see it definitely is inside of there. Let's go to the final slide then. When we looked at the race ethnicity again, and we saw that, yes, there is an impact. It's the effect size is not as large. Again, we go back to that rule of thumbs. How big is this impact? We can see 1.174 effect size inside of here. So that tells us this is a small effect size, but yes, there's definitely a significant relationship between the race or the group that you belong to and the outcomes as we looked at these different social emotional responses that the students were giving and basically their experience within the school. So thank you. I'll turn it back to Casey.
Thank you, Aaron. And with that, I believe that is the final slide. And Chair Hansen, that's all for us. We do have our contact information on the back, but of course, we're not going anywhere. If you want to follow up and you want a deeper knowledge about some of the data we presented today, please reach out to us.
Thank you, all who presented. And thank you to the committee members for tolerating this method of putting this forth. We had a lot of information. There was a concern on my part that if we ask questions along the way that we'd get hung up maybe on the first portion of the presentation, not be able to at least get some sort of overview as to all of it. I hope that you've all had a chance to look at this prior to the meeting. And now you've had a flavor from the experts, at least on what's here and what we're seeing. But now I'd like to open it up to questions so that we can understand the data here. Some of the questions we may be able to answer right here on the spot. Other ones, we'll ask staff just to write those down if it's going to take some more research or maybe be a more in-depth answer. So let me see if we have any questions. Does anybody want to lead out? I've got Laura's hand up first. You're the front row student today, Laura.
Well, I think that it might help just to I don't think that these are more of clarifying questions on the presentation than maybe some in-depth questions. On the intergenerational poverty piece that Lea talked about, she talked about there's 4 pieces that they're working on, and one of them was family economic stability. How are we in our department working on family economic stability? Or is that just one of the factors or functions? That's my first question.
Okay, and Lea, I'll ask you to address that. And maybe as we hit these areas, if someone else has a question on this particular area, let's keep Lea talking about that, and then we'll move on to the next one. I had a question about the definition.
Lea?
Oh, sorry, Lea?
Yes, so the Intergenerational Poverty Initiative is a multi-agency collaboration. So that area would be something that a different agency adds to the report and sets goals and works on those goals. Of course, there is overlap with a lot of the pieces. And we do have annual research projects that we're working on doing. One that Wynn presented, this was year 2. And the hope is that eventually we'll get to the point where we can cross-collaborate on those research projects and look at the interaction of data from multiple agencies.
Follow-up, Chair?
Please, go ahead.
Can you tell me what other agencies we're working with in collaboration?
It's Department of Workforce Services, Department of Health, Juvenile Justice Services. We have researchers from institutions of higher ed on the committee. Wynn, can you help me out? Who am I missing?
Lea, I'm sorry. So you have a committee that works on this together?
Yeah, I have the list right here. It's us, the Utah Department of Human Services, Utah Department of Health, Higher Ed, and Department of Workforce Services.
Thank you. I'll wait on my next one.
Lea, and while we're on this topic, could you just give me the quick definition of intergenerational poverty? How do we tell if kids are in intergenerational poverty?
So that uses public assistance data from Department of Workforce Services. So, oh gosh, I can't remember off the top of my head, but I want to say their data goes back 80 years or so. And so a student is identified as experiencing intergenerational poverty if the data that we have shows that the student has been receiving public assistance for at least a 1-year period, but also that their parent or guardian that they live with has also received public assistance for at least a year during their youth.
Okay, thank you. So 2 generations from that data involved in public assistance is the basic definition?
Yes.
Thanks. Does anyone else have questions about this particular area? So we're talking about the intergenerational poverty area, and I've got hands up. I know Jenny's got a hand up. Is it on this topic, Jenny?
You know what? I wish I had organized exactly as we're going through this. So you're going to have to apologize. I do have a lot of questions, but I do have, because as state board members, and we are to help in accessing resources. I mean, we are to make sure that those things are available. So in this particular area, I mean, and there's a recent report out, and I think it would be fair to ask that that's included somewhere so the public can view that as well. It may not be on this month's, but somewhere where public can review this information that just came out, and it goes through all the programs that that we provide for intergenerational poverty. And the same with, and then I thought this was fascinating at the very end. So I'm just kind of addressing, this isn't really a question yet, but at the end of that was another fascinating thing on all the food programs that could be accessed or used, the child nutrition program. And man, there's like, I think 12 of them or so. So I guess my question, and this is going to probably be the fill of most of my questions throughout the day, is where are we seeing the success in this area? In intergenerational poverty, where are our successes? Where are we seeing districts? Where are we seeing communities that are really knocking this out of the park? They're taking students, they're working with them, they're providing programs for them, and it's making a difference, right? That's where we want to say, okay, where are these successes, and can those successes be replicated in other areas? And where are the drawbacks in other areas throughout our state? Are those drawbacks in rural areas? Are there those drawbacks in more centralized in our in like larger districts? And similar to what we saw yesterday, I was so impressed with Murray School District and the way they were able to create levels of access for students for internet service, right? That was such an impressive thing. That district themselves said, what do we need to do? How do we make this successful? And they continued to overcome the barriers. So with our students with intergenerational poverty, and that is there's a wide group of programs. I guess my question is where are we seeing these huge successes, and what do they look like?
And Malia, is that something that you can address just briefly where we are seeing?
Not off the top of my head, but I hope Wynn was maybe taking notes during that commentary, because this could help us as we collaborate on determining what our next research project's going to be.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks, Malia. That's what I was going to say. I'm happy to have a go at a little bit of that, at least, if that's okay.
All right.
We are in the process of writing a research proposal for our next year's longitudinal report, and we will be choosing a program to study. Casey, do you have the ability to back up the slides to the?
Yeah, I hope that we're all taking notes.
Sure. Where would you like me to go?
Could you back up to the intergenerational poverty piece that I was on, and we'll just
Sure.
the results. I'll start talking about highlights and what we might think of as working. Yeah, we'll stop right there. So what this slide is showing you, that above that blue line, those are the 3 programs that saw the highest participation rates from students affected by intergenerational poverty. And below that line are all programs and services that are offered, but you can see those participation rates are ranging from 3.4% to about 1%. So there's definitely a lot of opportunity available that students could be taking advantage of that presumably they're not taking advantage of. I think the next slide will speak to your question at least a little bit. Actually, one more down, sorry. So this slide is from participation rates for the early literacy program. And this one at first glance looks really great, right? Students who are affected by IGP have relatively higher participation rates, among the highest for this program. But if I understand this, and I'm not an expert on all these programs, obviously, but if I understand this program correctly, it's for kindergarten through 3rd grade students. And we use Acadian's benchmark data. And for students who aren't meeting benchmark, they have access to reading interventions. And so these high percentages here represent that students who are affected by intergenerational poverty at these percentages are getting the support to improve reading. So I suppose that's a highlight. Otherwise, I don't have a specific program to point to at this moment to say, this is the winner, let's get behind this one and go forward.
Well, and can I just clarify on that? I guess I'm not looking for the winner, so to speak, or this is going to solve the problems. I guess what I'm looking for is where are we seeing the successes of the programs we're implementing? In the groups you're meeting with, I guess I'm assuming that they're talking about successes of these groups, or the effectiveness of the programs themselves, right? I mean, that's what we're asking here is, are these effective or not? Are these effective for this particular group of students? And that's what I'm looking for. And if they are effective, and you can see this, yeah, with the literacy, focusing on that early literacy is we're actually hitting that population, right? And then the effectiveness of it is the question, where we're seeing those successes. I don't know, does Salt Lake School District have a very successful program in this area so that we can have that further dialogue, or whoever, right?
The Research Commission asked us initially pretty much the same question you're asking now. And this report was our first response to that question because we couldn't identify the program that we should focus on, or it. So yeah, we'll hopefully.
Okay, so that, if I'm understanding, you're saying that this is the initial approach to that, and you'll be narrowing that down into and getting a little bit more into the weeds so we can really find where that's succeeding.
We'll be choosing a program to study from this, correct?
I'll jump in right here, just in the interest of time. I appreciate the dialogue. I think that there's going to be probably a general overall request to get more specific data. We have a lot of aggregate data here, but as I looked at it, the demographics of our state vary wildly, I think, from say an Ogden School District to something out in Paiute to Duchesne, somewhere like that. There's a big difference in our demographics, and it would be interesting and probably valuable for us to look at data on a more specific level, like the Ogden that was pulled out for us today, so we could see what happened there, and that may help us to find those successes. I believe there's also some other efforts going on in trying to find those pockets of success, and I think Patty Norman could help us with that. Are you there, Patty? Can you just?
I am, yeah. Thank you. And thank you for the question, Chair Hansen and Board Member Earl. This is exactly what we are focusing on right now through the efforts of the strategic plan in Area 2E, and really being able to delve down into those successful practices and identifying them so that they can scale up. And then we're also working on it with the School Improvement Center, or the school where Tracy Vandeventer is working as well, is really to identify these best practices. And so I wanted you to be aware that as staff to the board, these are areas that we're concentrating on, and we can be bringing that forward as we move further along in the progress within the strategies of the strategic plan goals.
Thank you. So I've got more hands up here. Janet and Brent, are your questions about this particular area, intergenerational poverty?
No, mine is on a different area.
Okay. Brent, is yours on this area?
My mind's swimming so much, my mind's everywhere. So I will wait until we move on.
Oh, do you have a question then for us, Brent?
I'm trying to decide if I have a question. I have lots of things in my brain. I have lots of things that have been going through my mind for the last couple of weeks.
Okay.
And yeah, so
I'm gonna, if there's nothing else on intergenerational poverty, I'm gonna jump back to Laura and let her do her next one, and then I'll hit Janet and then Brent.
Thank you, Chair. Mine is another just clarifying question. And the clarifying question has, I believe that Wynn did this. It was a question about safety and the survey. I'm interested how the survey was sent out, the age of the students who participated in the survey, were parents involved in the survey, and when was it sent? It looked like it was 2020. And was it sent to a variety of schools, including rural and suburban?
One more back. There we go. Yeah. So this am I good to answer that?
That Lynn, if you would.
Sure. The SHARP survey, I believe it's been administered as far back as 2003, and it's administered every other year. And the Utah Department of Human Services, I believe, contracts out with a third party to administer that. It's not administered through our agency, and I don't have details in front of me about their exact administration procedures. David Christensen might know more about that. I believe they usually take it in the spring, kind of Marchish, and it's definitely statewide.
Yeah, Chair, if I could.
Please.
Yeah, so Member Belknap, so it's the SHARP survey, it's every other year. we, along with Department of Health and there's a third one, the USB decides on or has some input on the questions that are being asked. And it's 6th, 8th, 10th, and 12th grade students only. And they are going to be doing this survey again, I think in the next month or two. And so it's not required, LEAs accept it or not, they can do it, and teachers, rather parents have to sign off, opt in or opt out of it. I know Brian Olmstead's on here, and I don't want to throw you under the bus, Brian, but I know Brian's been involved in this as well. If you could add.
Chair, before we go to Brian, and maybe Brian can answer this. Okay, I get this now. For somehow I missed that information was all from the Sharps. So a follow-up question. How do we reach these students if it's not going through our database and it's going through a third party? How are they accessing the information on these students and their emails, or how, and how are they accessing them?
So Brian Olmstead, Student Support Coordinator for the board on staff. So I need to ask a clarifying question. Are you asking how we reach back and maybe identify a particular student that has responded in a certain way? Can you help me understand the question?
Yeah, Brian, thanks. Chair, yes?
Yeah, go ahead.
Great. Thank you, Chair. What I'm trying to get to is, if this survey is not done in our office and from our platform, how are we giving a third party the information to reach to these students? Not reach back, reach in.
Correct. Okay. So as David mentioned, this is Lea Opt-In Participation. So the survey is developed between 3 agencies at the state level, and then a contractor provides the service of administration, and every LEA opts into the survey. So the LEA is making the choice to administer the survey. There is no student level data gathered at all. It's completely anonymous. So if your LEA has 500 of these 6th, 8th, 10th, and 12th graders, you would gather 2,000 surveys. And when we did it paper pencil, it's online this year. So you would take your 2,000 surveys, you would distribute them. The students would take them. Only those that had parent participation, allowed. You'd gather those. They'd go back to the third-party vendor, and they would process the data without any ability to identify a student.
Okay, so I just need to track this back.
Yep.
So the 3 parties who we work together, which I'd actually like to know who they are, but we can go on, reaches to the LEA. The LEA, first of all, agrees to do it. Then they reach to students, and then students say, yes, I want to do it. And then the reach to the parents, and the parents have to sign a form that they can take this survey. Then they take the survey, it goes back to the LEA. Then who does the LEA send this information to, and how is it de-identified?
Okay, so I'm going to try to loop some. Okay, so the 3 agencies is the Department of Health. And then at DHS, it's the Division of Substance Abuse and Mental Health. So that's often called the division. And then the Utah State Board of Education. So those are the 3 state agencies. I want to change your process a little bit. We don't reach out to the student with the survey until the parent has opted them in. So okay. The parent request is made first. Then everybody that parent says, yes, I want my student to take this survey, then that's when the student gets the survey. as the collection then happens back at the third-party provider, as the survey provider, they compile the results and they send the results of the SHARP survey to the LEA representative, which is usually the superintendent or charter director. And then they have complete control and access to their profile, is what we call them, their results. And if they choose to disseminate those, they can. Some people work in community coalitions, and so the coalitions get permission to pull, like you might have, right, a city in one of our large LEA, our urban LEAs. Well, you might have just a city that wants to see, well, how is my city doing in terms of these measures? Well, that's very different than the whole LEA, right, from the east to the west. And so a city can request that they would pull out, right? They would carve out just that city data. I believe it's done by zip code.
Okay. Chair, one more, and then I'll let this go. So one more piece is when you say that the provider or the third party is collecting it, especially where we have it online, have they gone through the data privacy and signed our forms to make sure that that data of those students is private?
Which
the third party, especially with the online this year.
Yes, but I guess I want to make sure that the only data at the student level is I believe what we call directory information. So there's no student level data. There's only aggregate.
I disagree, Brian. And the reason I'm saying that is the kids have to do it. They have to identify themselves to get online. Something has to be identified for them to take this test. So we can take this offline. I think there's somewhere between the student taking this, especially online, and the data moving up, there has to be student information, an email, something that is being sent to this third party.
Yeah, we can talk offline.
Okay, thank you.
There's no sharing of emails through this process.
Well, they have to. How do they access the program then?
I'm going to jump in right here, and I think we do need to take this one offline. I just want to frame this discussion a little bit, and I appreciate the question, Laura, and I think that with all of this, we're going to have a variety of questions, but really, we're addressing a request from Access to provide some specific training to educators in the state of Utah. We could have satisfied that request by pulling an off-the-shelf training program from some vendor and putting that out to our educators. We elected as a committee not to do that. We said that we want to understand the situation in Utah so that we can determine what training is needed, what the situation is in general and in specific in the different districts in Utah, and really try to solve the problems that we're seeing in this area. So Access may have asked a narrow question, but they've opened kind of a Pandora's box because we're looking at this whole issue, and it's an important issue. We've had a lot of public input about this. This is an important issue on the national stage, and we are going to go in and figure out what's happening in Utah and figure out what we can do to help, particularly in the area of making sure that there is what I determine, or what I call equity of access. And I believe we've defined that as a school board, as a state school board in many different documents and settings. But to help these children, meet them where they are and try to move them forward so they can achieve their potential through our education system and succeed. So I think that if we can today try to focus on that aspect of this, and I know there are many other questions with regard to data privacy, other things that will all be opened up. If we can take those offline, if we need to bring them back, if it's something that needs to be addressed in this committee, we can certainly do that. but if we can narrow our focus to what is the current state of affairs with regard to access to education across all demographic groups for our children. And I think that that will help us maybe to move that forward. I did have one question on the SHARP survey, just maybe an observation. I noticed that the number of respondents declines by grade. So we have sixth graders at 27,000, and it goes down, eighth graders 25, 10th grade at 20,000, but then the 12th graders, only 12,000 respondents. And unfortunately, I think that's where a lot of our best data in some of these areas might come from, is from the older students. Do we have any idea why that's happening? I don't know who could address that. Aaron, are you the one on Sharps, or is there someone else that?
That would be Brian again.
Brian, I'm sorry, yeah, back to Brian.
Yeah, thank you. Again, Brian Olmsted, Student Support Coordinator. I think it's primarily an issue. I can't explain it. I'll just say what I think. And I believe it's the parent participation process, right? So you're going to have a measure of those 12th graders needing to take that parental permission slip, home, get that signed, bring it back. And I think it's a natural flow of things. And where we only opt in, we can only administer the survey to those who have opted in. Obviously, we know there's twice the number of 12th graders, present in our system. But the process, I believe, is going to create the trend that we're seeing.
Okay, thank you. I guess we don't have a lot of control over that. Also on the race categories, certainly that it matches up fairly well with our demographics, but there are a couple of areas that were where we're disproportionately represented or underrepresented, it looked like, going through that. And I guess, again, where it's an opt-in, we don't have any control over that as well. Is that right?
That's correct, yes.
Okay. I will give Janet her chance now. Janet, did you have some questions?
I don't really have, questions. I want to move in a little bit different direction in terms of next steps forward, and make some comments about what I would see as next steps forward on this issue and recommendation. Would you like me to wait?
Janet, we just see what Brent has, and then follow up again with Jenny, and then we'll go to the next steps.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Brent, I think you're up next.
All right, so I am going to do my very best to stay in line. That's not the easiest thing sometimes for me, because I have so many thoughts going on inside of my brain here. But I want to step back to the board's vision. The board's vision is for all Utah students to be prepared to I'm fumbling over my words, prepared to succeed and lead. That's the goal that all of us have. And, I'm so appreciative of what the board has done already on this work. So much has been accomplished. I appreciate Governor Cox and his statements during the State of the State address in regards to this issue. I appreciate our districts and what they are already doing. I looked into the two districts and I didn't look into the smaller ELAs or the charter schools, but I'm sure they have these things as well. But I just looked at Weber and Davis School District. Weber has an equity, justice, and inclusion department. Davis School District has an educational equity and federal programs division. I checked Ogden. They're not in my area, but I know they're in yours, Chair. And they have the same thing. And I know that work is being accomplished. I know that they see the need for this. I see our role in the state board is to support that. and to continue moving on. Now, here's what I see as the problem. The problem is that we're so focused on the outcomes, and those outcomes are important because but there's a story behind those outcomes. Those numbers, there's something behind it. And when you ask the question, why do we have these outcomes? That starts a fight. And the fight is that there are those who say, well, the reason these outcomes are occurring is because of racism. And then there's the counter back. We have educational equality. There's something else going on. It's not because we're racist. So this idea then comes over into, we've been asked to say whether or not we should have racist or anti-racist curriculum. So just getting to the bottom of that, now people start looking at that politically. They start looking at it politically and say, well, that's saying that the reason this is occurring is because of racism, and this comes from this particular ideology. And I know that that's not what this is all about. It's about the board's vision is that all Utah students be prepared to succeed and lead. When we start seeing this data, we say, well, it appears that that's not happening. And I appreciate Board Member Earl, what she had to say about where do you see the success? Where do we see improvement? I see the need for this. I see the need for educational equity, stepping away from the political side of things every single day. Every single day in my classroom, in my school, in my community, I see the need for us to achieve our vision in a better way. So I think that there's more to this, but I think from my side, we need that equity of educational opportunity. That is the focus. That is what our directive should be. That should be the direction we're going. And I hope I was able to communicate some of my thoughts in a way that was understandable. But there's so much that we're doing that is great. And let's focus on what our vision is. Let's focus on our mission and what we're trying to accomplish.
Thank you. I'm going to go back to Board Member Earl and then Board Member Belknap, and then we'll go to Janet and we'll try to move this forward. So
yeah, thank you. I'll try to be concise. I do like the data end of it. So I feel like we were a little rushed and the public was maybe rushed today, and that's all right. There are a couple things I asked to go deeper into the SHARP survey data because there's a lot of things we're missing, and unfortunately, we're not even asking that question again this year. The question about I don't have it right in front of me. Where do you feel, or why do you believe you're bullied? We pulled that off, and they said no one was you. Anyways, we won't go into that. We've already had that discussion. But that is such a key thing, I think, as we're moving forward. Are we improving upon that? Districts look at this data and this information consistently to say, what is it we need? Okay, so there's a couple of things I found that I thought were interesting that I think they are relevant to our discussion. Number one, when I went back and looked at the data, where do you feel safe? Instead of where do you feel unsafe, I looked at, they had the four terminologies were very safe, somewhat unsafe, or very unsafe. But if you look at our classrooms and you can look across the full board, you can break it down. It's 90% or more of students feel either safe, very safe, or somewhat safe within our classrooms. That is a huge thing for Utah educators to know. You are keeping kids safe. Now, where do they feel unsafe? It should be kind of a no-brainer, but parking lot, right? I mean, these are the exchanges of kids running into kids for whatever reason. This was another interesting thing up at one of the junior highs that I visited back in November. One of the key things that they found is that, and this is one of the benefits of COVID, right? We can find those everywhere, these little inklings of miracles. They said that they have less problems in their junior high school because kids aren't going to their lockers. They said that cut down on half of our issues in our classrooms. We aren't having these kids trying to open lockers and then, pushing against each other as they're trying, whatever. They said, I don't know that we're going to go back to lockers because it has cut down on the issues we have in our school. That's not a race issue. That's not an economic issue. That was just an odd thing that happened in conjunction with COVID, and they're not going to return to that. Let's see, there's a couple of other items that I thought were very interesting, and maybe Brian can talk about this because this was fascinating to me. When you talk about suicide data, we presented some of it here, but when you break it down from male to female, there is a startling statistic difference of the amount of students who worry about other students committing suicide. Female students, it's clear, 67.4%. It just pushes that stat way high. Our female students are taking the messages we're sending about suicide and they're internalizing them and worrying about them, where other students, male students, are at a lower proportion. And it's a significantly statistical number for any race. It's the same. And so, Brian, I don't know if you can actually speak to that, but that would be important data for safety and prevention in our schools to understand the messaging we're using there. Do you have any insights into that? I'm sure that was something that stood out as our suicide people looked at those numbers.
We address that, Ryan?
I'm going to need a restatement of that. Sorry.
Okay, sorry.
Yep.
So the number when it comes to on the SHARP survey, sorry.
I understood the question to be the influence of male female on the SHARP survey.
Worrying. It was the worrying. What do they worry about? And it was the male female comparison on suicide specifically.
So, and is that another demographic we should be looking at, I guess, the male female?
Well, in this case, we should, because there is such a statistically, I mean, it's like a 20% difference, if not more than that. I don't remember the full scope for the male, but I wrote down that female was 67.
Okay. Brian, could you?
Yes. If I can speak to the analysis of the data that an LEA receives. So I think a great advantage to the state, the vendor that we've worked with has been consistent. They've maintained that contract over time. And so they've worked hard to develop a tool to crosstab. So you can take your data set and you can do things like that. You can say, of students that answered this question this way, show me the difference between gender, because gender is one of the directory information items that we have the students mark, right? And so, and all of the different things, you could go to any two questions and you can compare them. We call it cross-tabbing and get that analysis. And so I think to your specific question, have we done that? I know that I haven't. I know that Kathy Davis in her work spends a lot of time into the SHARP survey data. David Christensen, who's on with us, I know he has gone in and looked at different things, but as LEAs have that ability, whether they have or not, again, I don't know, but the ability is there. And so it's been a great thing to develop this tool over time to analyze the data, because having the data is the first step, but then the analysis, of course, is next.
Brian, I just think if we could pull that sometime, maybe even have that available in the future for reference. And anyways, that's one comment. The last comment on the SHARP survey, even though I have about 10 more questions, but my final comment is just because a student marks something on a survey, and once again, these are self-reported, does not mean we know the cause of that or who. For example, on our bullying, a student may be bullied for a specific reason, or they perceive a certain reason, but we don't know who's doing the bullying. And so I think we got to be careful that we're not reading into it that it's a specific ethnicity is bullying another specific ethnicity. Unless we know that, unless we're asking that question, we've got to be careful we're not reading into it something that's not there, because we don't know. Is that an accurate statement? These are students' perceived relationships, and we don't know who they perceive as doing the bullying. It could be even someone that is very similar in thought process. We don't know. Is that accurate?
Oh, absolutely. You're absolutely right, and it's an important thing to remember in the analysis, right? And Dr. Shooter, I know that he's great on this, and we've had conversations about being very careful of like drawing a conclusion, right? And looking at that causation, right? You have to be extremely careful. It's data. You're right that it's self-reported. And so does it have a measure of grain of salt to it? Well, of course, every self-reported thing does. But it's in volume. And I think the absolutely astounding thing that we have with the SHARP survey is the length, right? That longevity. Every 2 years since 2003. And so you can start to look at the volume of data over time, and that might cause you to draw a stronger conclusion, but it should always come with a measure of care.
And just one last thing, not on the SHARP survey, but on even with our law enforcement and our part that David Christensen presented on, it would be really helpful to have the end size on each one of those. When you're talking expulsions, are only 22 for the whole state. And we're seeing some, from year to year, we're seeing this extreme jump. The reason why is because one year might have 3 students in that particular category versus the next year there weren't any. So 22, if that's our end size, it may give an appearance of, something that's not there as far as what we're trying to interpret from it. We really need to understand the numbers so that those could even be put underneath things so that I know the numbers we're looking at and that we're not thinking our districts. Actually, that may be great benefit to say over the course of time, we are having less expulsions because we are doing X, Y, and Z. We're being proactive with families. We're doing these other things. So the end size is really relevant to know what data we're looking at so we don't misinterpret it too. So thank you.
Thank you, Jenny, and thanks for the responses. I did have one quick comment request on that end size. I think it is very important when we're dealing with small numbers, a group of 5 kids who all are American Indian get expelled for one incident, and all of a sudden our numbers jump all over the place, and we need to be cognizant of that. I would like just quickly to have someone on staff give us just a rundown of the demographics in the state. We have about, 700,000 students. Could someone tell us, is that an accurate number? And could someone just give us a rundown of where the kids fit demographically? Do we have a table or a chart that might show that?
Aaron, could you answer that question?
Yeah, this is Aaron Bruff from Data and Statistics. It is on our website. You would ask, you say, do I have the numbers memorized? No. So if you go to our website, go to Data and Statistics, and you go into reporting, and you look at the enrollment numbers. We do have the breakdowns inside of there. So I'm pulling it up right now as we speak.
I was thinking one of these slides had it on it, because it's like 71% fall into the white category, and then it seemed like we had a slide that had it on it, unless it was off of another thing I read.
I think that There's a slide there that says that. I think on the one that I was looking at, Asians were not included on that, but I just wanted, of our general population, that would put that kind of in perspective.
Chair Hansen, if I've just put a link in the chat box, that actually goes to our fingertip facts, which Mark Peterson puts out every year. And that gives a lot of these simple facts at a glance. So if you were to scroll down, one of the first things on there in that, it does go about the demographics and the percents and the testing and whatnot on there.
Okay, very good. We can use that as a resource. I think everyone's had a chance to speak. Everybody's got their hand up and everyone's had a chance to speak. We haven't heard much from Janet though, because she wants to move us forward. Are we ready for that, Janet? Why don't you give us what you have right now, and then we'll go from there. I'm looking at the clock. We've got about another half hour on this topic, and then we need to finish that last item on the agenda. So we do need to decide what needs to happen going forward. And I don't imagine this is going to be the end of discussion today, but we certainly want to give staff whatever requests we have for them and try to move things forward. So please go ahead, Janet.
Thank you, Chair, for giving me this opportunity. I have been impressed with the voluminous amount of data that has been prepared and given to us by our staff that indicates that, yes, there are some needs. There are some differences in the way students are treated and their experience in our schools. But I wanted to come back to the recommendation that was made to our committee by Access that talks about doing professional learning among our teaching staff to raise their awareness and promote change. So I have 9 items here that I have thought about in terms of how we might address their specific recommendation for professional learning. And I have them written down, but I'd like to see if we could get information on how these 9 ideas might move us forward or give us information about whether or not to move forward on their recommendation. So number 1 is I have read and researched some of these things. It talks about racial identity among children beginning in adolescence, and maybe for white kids even a little later than that. If that is indeed the case, would it make sense to focus our professional development in the secondary schools? That's point number 1. Point number 1, is racial sensitivity training required as part of our current teacher education preparation programs? Do we know whether we're doing anything? And if so, what? Number 3, are our teacher preparation programs culturally inclusive? Number 4, can our universities partner in some way with our LEAs to do and provide professional development for teachers that are currently teaching? Number 5, what would the cost of the professional development be that the Access Committee is asking? I imagine that there would be quite a bit of cost associated with that. And are there grants or ways to fund the kind of professional learning that they're asking us to do? Number 6, would there be other ways to provide this professional learning, or what are alternate ways of providing this professional learning for educators, and what would the cost of developing those be? Should we make, number 7, should we make educator preparation voluntary? See how well it is received, see where the teachers that are crying out for this kind of training are located, and is it helping them? Do they need it? Is this something we should do across the board, or are there areas where we could focus our professional training? Number 8, how do we get buy-in from districts, administrators, and LEAs to know that this is something that they desire and that something would be worth our time and financial input into doing. And number 9, would there be an appetite to have ongoing support groups for trained teachers to support each other and support new teachers that are coming into the field? Those are my 9 points that I would like to know more about to see if we could move forward on the access recommendation number 2.
Thank you, Janet. I don't know, can you hear me?
I can.
Because I've lost audio again. I can read what you're saying on the text, on the closed captions, so I'll try to get through that way.
Okay, I have these written out and I can send them to, would you like me to send them to you, to Nora Lee?
If you could do both of those, send those to me and to Nora Lee. In general, what I got from reading your list as you spoke it is that we really want to know the state of the state, I guess, with regard to teacher preparation and the issues that have been raised. So,
yes, I think that's the next step.
So I think that we can take those specific recommendations, and the general idea being to understand where are we now with this, what kind of training is going on, and where then we can look at how that could be augmented based on what issues we see. And then also I thought the cost and the other information would be valuable. So let's take those, and you could make a motion now, Janet, if you'd like, to give direction to staff to look into that. Or I don't know if we need a motion. Do we, Nora Lee? Or Patty?
We would need a motion to direct staff.
Okay. I don't know, Janet, if you're ready to make that, and we'll get this part moving forward.
Yes, I'd be happy to make a motion. I would move that the Standards and Assessment Committee directs staff to look into the current state of our professional development as regarding racial sensitivity training, what is happening with our universities, and the cost of such professional training, and where exactly this professional training is needed, and other points made in the text I will send forward.
Okay, thank you. We have a motion then to direct staff to look into the current state of professional development as regarding racial sensitivity training, what's happening with our universities, the cost of such professional training, and where exactly this professional training is needed, and other points made in the list that Board Member Cannon will send forward. Board Member Cannon, I wonder if I could make maybe a friendly amendment to that to broaden that to include equity of access to children in all groups. So that would include disabled kids, kids that are in the socioeconomic classes that we've discussed, I guess high level learners, and also female is one of the demographics we talked about. Can we expand that as we look at the training to see what we're doing in all those areas?
I think that does go beyond the scope of what the access recommendation was, but if you would like to do that, those are all groups that I have concerns and cares about.
And that's, maybe it's not a friendly amendment. Maybe we need to put that before the committee. But I certainly, as I said before, I think access has opened the door for us. And I think while we're in this, we should open the door as wide as we can and make sure that we're serving all our students and providing the training for all of them. I'll put that forward as an amendment. That's the motion to amend would be to open up the investigation to cover all of those student characteristics that were just discussed. Any discussion to that amendment? Got hands up all across the board. Laura, you're at the top of my screen.
Well, I went right in front of Brent. That's so exciting. So I would like to, Chair, could we make it more clear that instead of all of these things we've discussed, just instead of narrowing it down to female, do you have a list that could be included? And I absolutely agree with the amendment. We're not trying to meet a request by our access committee, who is someone who gives us ideas and then we decide what we want to do with them. And so I appreciate the amendment. And so Scott, do you know what I'm asking here?
I do. I'm not sure. Maybe that can be provided offline if everyone can vote with the spirit of that. But the idea would be to include, as we talked about, English language learners, intergenerational poverty, any kind of LGBTQ or an LGBTQ+, also male, female, any of those demographics, including racial and ethnic demographics, just to see what we have in the training right now.
Thank you. Then I support this amendment. Thank you.
Okay, I'll move to Brent now. You've moved to the top of my screen.
Yes, I support that amendment. I do have, and maybe you can help me frame this, and maybe this is already included, but as I've looked at, for example, Davis School District, they have 5 equity trainings that they've put together that are listed here in their department. I see that there's a committee that's been formed in Weaver School District. They actually have a statement, a mission statement regarding that. So I guess my question, and maybe we're not to this point yet. My question is, should we just be supporting what's already going on? And if it's not going on, then have some way of encouraging that and leave it up to the local LEAs to determine what is most appropriate in regards to these questions, instead of us trying to dictate one thing that goes throughout the entire state, because it appears that it's being funded somehow. There's money there somehow. So my question is there do we have any data on how many districts have set up these types of organizations dealing specifically with these issues? And do we know where the money is coming from for them to do this? Is it just coming from the WPU, or is it coming from other areas? Can that question be answered?
And Brent, I believe, and Janet, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe that's kind of the heart of Janet's motion, is that we want staff to go out and find out what the state of the state is in this area with regard to content funding, all of that, and then see what our role is. I think that would be the next step in my mind, is after we understand the lay of the land, we determine what USBE's role is in all this.
Yes, I'd agree.
So can we state that more explicitly in regards to the motion, that we're also looking at current programs within districts? Because I'm not sure that was specifically addressed.
Let's do this. We have one amendment that's on the floor right now. Let's take the vote on that amendment. And I have Jenny still with her hand up on that one. And then we can jump back to the main motion as amended, if it's amended, and make any changes we need to that to clarify. Okay. Board Member Earl.
Yes, so I have a couple of thoughts. First of all, universities have been using this training for years. And so I guess we could ask ourselves, where's the research? I think that's another important part, that maybe an amendment or something to this is actually showing the research that shows the effectiveness of, and I'm not sure maybe specifically what we're asking. If we're asking for diversity training, is that what you're asking, Janet? Did they look into if they're doing diversity training, or if they're adequately,
My
Yeah.
motion said racial sensitivity training.
Racial sensitivity training. Okay, so where then once again, like I said, I think that this research should be easy to see. Is this actually accomplishing what it's set out to do? So I would like research included in this. Extensive. What are the drawbacks to it? What are the benefits to it? Not just are they using it, but is it actually doing and accomplishing what it says it's going to do? So it there's a research component that needs to be added to this, and there needs to be some kind of a
I don't know. My connection's not strong enough. I've got my video off so I can maybe get through.
Okay.
But I wonder if that might be a separate motion. So this is kind of gather what's going on right now. Where are we? And the amendment broadens that from just racial sensitivity to equity of access for all demographic groups.
Okay, so you want me to wait? I have a different motion then.
Raise a separate motion after this one. I think we could do that. Okay, is there anything else on this amendment to Janet's motion?
I just want to, before we vote on this though, can we be really specific about what this motion is?
So the amendment right now is to include in our request to staff information about equity of access, current training for equity of access for all of the student characteristics that we've discussed. And I'll provide a list, but that would include intergenerational poverty, that would include disability, that would include race and ethnicity, that would include LGBTQ plus status, that would include male, female. I believe that's all the ones that we've
So equity of access is referring to knowledge that teachers have about the resources that are accessible for these students. Am I understanding that correctly? I just want to make sure my terms are the same.
Yeah,
so
and
voting on.
That's another one we need to get back to is some definitions, but for right now, this is just what training touches on that particular topic. And I think that we can use equity of access just to describe how are we dealing with all these kids and various kids, this assortment of children that come into our classes. How are the teachers being trained to meet their individual?
Okay, it still seems a little bit ambiguous, but
I think all of this is, and maybe that's another motion, is that we need to get some better definitions, because I've heard in our discussions many different definitions of what equity means. And so that's probably something else we need to work on. But for right now, that is the intent of the motion. I believe we're just asking for data from staff, and I hope that's clear enough for staff. Maybe Patty, could you comment on that? Is that?
Yes, actually what I'm going to do is I've just asked Jerry if he'd give me permission to share my screen so that I can type up this motion, because I think there's many parts to it. So just so that staff is really clear and can bring back exactly what is needed, let me, I'm just waiting for the ability to screen share, and then we'll be able to then craft it that way.
okay, that would help me. I want to know exactly what we're asking. And I know Janet's put a lot of thought into this, so I want to make sure it's what she needs to or what she's interested in, but also I need to know that I can either get behind it or not based on what the actual motion is.
Let's take the time to do that. I appreciate it. These are fairly complicated motions, so.
Okay, and I have emailed the 9 points I made to you, Scott, and to Nora Lee.
It looks like I'm not sure if Jerry is on and can hear. So what I'm going to do is put those in the chat box. And Casey, you have the screen and access to screen share. So can you pull those points that I just put into the chat up on a document so that we can craft this together?
Sure.
On the chat box for you to see. And then as she's pulling that up into a document.
Okay, can you see? Let me know when you can see. Okay, good.
I can see. And the number one was specifically to address professional learning for race, because from what I've read, racial identity begins in adolescence, so it would make sense to begin addressing those issues in the secondary schools. Now, Scott's amendment would enlarge that to other areas, but maybe we can keep that on just for addressing the issue of racial identity.
So, and Janet, if I'm correct, the board is directing staff to research and provide information on the current state
Yes.
of professional learning in these areas. Is that right?
Yes. Well said.
So, I'm sorry, number 2 says start professional learning with secondary schools. Are we researching if there's professional learning going on, or are we directing staff to start doing that? And if so, that goes into that dialogue that Brent had about.
No, my second point was, is racial sensitivity training required as part of teacher education preparation currently?
Okay.
Is racial sensitivity training required as part of teacher education preparation currently?
Okay.
One more clarifying. I want to be clear on whatever racial sensitivity training means. So when we start researching into this, I want to know exactly what you're researching. So in other words, when you research racial sensitivity training, what are the components of that you're researching, and where did we get that from?
Okay, I'm looking at this, Janet, and help me. Maybe we want to know what's currently happening across the state. Is that right?
That's right. That's right.
So maybe we could broaden this out. You've got some very specific items in here, but we could.
I
just
do.
say,
Yeah.
What is being done by USBE and also by the districts in the areas of, and then we have racial sensitivity. We have also equity of access for race, LGBTQ, male, female, students with disability. Maybe we could make the motion more simple by just asking what's currently being done and how it's being funded. Are those the two main
Yes.
questions? And this other, a lot of the other, you're thinking ahead of us, I think. You're on the next step, maybe with some of the other items after we understand what's currently going on.
Okay, maybe this is beyond that too. This is Board Member Earl, is actually, how are they measuring its success? How do they know if it was successful or not? And maybe that is going beyond, but I think as we're going into these programs, universities, we need to say just because someone has a program doesn't mean it was successful, or what they learned from it that was successful, right? Because we really want to.
So that's kind of addressed in point number 8. Should we have this training be voluntary? Do we know how it's being received? And do those who have trained feel successful? That type of thing.
So Janet's given us a good list of questions that need to be looked into, that she wants to look into, and they look appropriate. And right now we're asking for the data that we need so that we can address those questions. I think that's the first step.
Yeah. But I think maybe for a motion, Scott, your idea is better because you've kind of made it more inclusive, and we can have my list of specifics. Staff can have those, but I think the overall idea is to look at the current state of professional learning, including cost needs and how they measure success. That I think that covers it pretty well, and the specifics can be uncovered as we look at that research and information staff gives us.
Okay, and would the idea then be to include everything from the college training, the training they receive at the university through, I saw you mention something about university programs. So is this what how our teachers are trained through their university training, and then as they take their jobs and receive training in the districts?
Yeah, I'm just wondering if how on top of this our university teacher prep programs are, what they're doing for our teachers. Is there a way to enlarge their role to offer training to active teachers? And those were my thoughts about the universities.
Okay. Maybe I can help then in trying to restate a motion after that conversation. Then I see Laura and Jenny both still have their hands up, so does Brent.
You're good at restating, Scott. Go for it.
Sure about that. The board directs staff to research and provide information on the current state of professional learning in regard to, and then we have all those, the list down below, race, LGBTQ, male, female, students with disabilities, students in poverty, including the university teacher preparation and professional learning in districts and through USBE.
Yeah.
And then data should include costs, needs, and how they measure success.
Very good.
Getting closer. Okay.
Yeah.
Laura and Brent, will give you a chance to weigh in. I know we're way out of our parliamentary procedure here. We've made a big amendment. I think if
that's why we're doing this in committee.
Chair, what was your last sentence on that professional learning piece?
Professional learning and training through USBE. So I guess district, professional learning, district and USBE training. Is that right? LEAs, let me see, including university preparation and professional learning in LEAs and through USBE. Are those all the avenues that our teachers receive training through?
Well, we didn't include the most pertinent one that was relevant throughout all of our research, and those were our socioeconomic dialogue. I think if we miss out on that, we've missed the whole point of all this research today.
That's the students living in poverty that's written there.
Oh, where am I looking? Oh, sorry, I'm looking for the acronym here. Yeah. So my apologies, but I feel like that our educators getting trained on that element, because all of these overlap into that.
Yep, I think we have it included there.
Sure.
Janet, is that okay for you, what we have there? And then we'll let Brent and
sure.
That. Yes.
There's one important thing. It doesn't state what. So we have this, and anyone going in to read it doesn't know if we're providing. So it says the board directs staff to research and provide information on the current state of professional learning in regard to race. So these things, but is it, are we, I think down at the bottom, it was as talking about determine racial sensitivity training, but are we just looking at any professional learning? If staff leaves this meeting, are we looking at any professional learning that is dealing with race, LGBTQ+, any professional learning regarding males and females? Does that make sense? We don't have a overarching statement, professional learning in regard to for these specific populations. That's the word that I'm looking for.
So if I look at, well, it's written several places in the documents that we've created, but in the access committees,
your voice has gone out, I think, so we can't hear you.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah, I can hear you now.
Yeah. So this is equity of educational services for students. So is that what we want with regard to equity of educational educational services. Janet, you still okay?
You know what? Your voice went out, so I didn't hear.
You'll have to look at the screen, I guess. We've got a blizzard up here, and I'm sure that my little dish is covered with snow.
Oh boy. Okay, so in regard to equity for educational services for students, including race, so on and so forth. Yes, I think that's good.
Okay. And I
Scott,
believe
one more thing, I think we would add family structure. That does have an impact.
I don't know. We don't have any data on that right now, Jenny. I don't know if there's any training.
We don't have any data on that. I mean, okay.
Yeah, well, we haven't seen any,
but
it's been presented.
Well, Cindy's testimony yesterday may have been a.
Yeah, let's hear what Brent and Laura have to say and see if we're at a point that we can move forward. And I apologize for butchering Robert's rules.
So I'm just trying to make certain we don't miss anyone. And it seems like we're putting together quite a list of work for staff. I guess one thing is, would it all be covered by at-risk? I don't know.
I know the recommendation from Access uses the words minoritized groups.
But
that may be another way to say it instead of listing them, but
Chair.
But don't we want to be all inclusive? If we use the word at risk, that includes any student population at risk, which to me includes all those characteristics, but not all students of race are at risk. Not all males and females are at risk. Not all,
Janet, so let's do this, Brent. Let me hear what Laura has to say. I understand you want at risk in there. I think what we're going to have to do is probably put a motion up there and then move forward with that. But Laura, give me your comments real quick.
I'm totally on Brent's page here that we're making a list when we should not be making a list. We should do professional learning in regards to equity for educational services for students. And it's for all students. And where do we have not equity? And then knowing and our staff knowing full well that we are looking at kids who are at risk for not graduating, kids who are at risk for not succeeding, at risk. So I think that making a list is really a problem.
Okay, Janet, are you okay with an amendment to pull out what's in green right there?
Sure. Yes.
Okay, let's put that motion on the table right now. And is there any further discussion to that? I'm looking at the clock and we're getting short on time.
Just real quick, I think that fits our vision statement really well if we look at it in that way, because all students.
Janet, are you okay with that motion as is?
Should we word it according to what the strategic plan states, or right here, and pull that in? Or do we just want to leave it as is? Current state of professional learning in regard to equity for educational services.
Equitable access.
Chair, I'm not able to hear what you're saying.
I don't know how to communicate with you except.
Okay, I can hear you now.
Please, let's pull that up. If I can do that without objection. So pull up the phrase that you have highlighted and put that in right there.
I really don't like to ensure equitable access.
Oh, okay.
It's like professional equitable access. We cannot ensure it.
Okay.
but we can try and provide it.
Professional learning related to
Equitable access. Thank you.
Okay, and then we'll pull out everything in green. And we will vote on that motion. And again, I won't, I'll try not to stray from Robert's rules like this in the future. I'm still getting used to this chair stuff. So that's the motion before the committee. The committee moves that the board directs staff to research and, the committee moves to direct staff to research and provide information on the current state of professional learning related to equitable access for quality educational opportunities for all students in regard to equity for educational service. No. Quality educational opportunities for all students in regard to equity for educational services for students, including university preparation and professional learning in LEAs and provided by USBE. So that's the motion. If we can go ahead and vote on that.
We need to change it to the committee direct staff, not the board.
Yeah, you're right. Okay, with that amendment, the committee directs staff, and the motion as stated. Please go ahead and vote on that.
So Scott, sorry, I have one question. We are putting that in our paragraph at the top, but then the listed points focus on race. They don't, are we asking that those points are expanded beyond just the racial sensitivity to the full?
The motion is just the motion that's at the top.
Okay.
That's all we're voting on.
Thank you for that clarification.
Okay. Now we can go ahead and vote. And I'm sorry to be moving this along. We do have one more item. And after all that, it looks like we're unanimous that we will direct staff to bring that information back to us. And I am sorry to cut off this discussion, but we do need to get to our last item. Patty's told me that that one needs to be completed. So we will bring this back again next month, hopefully with that new information, and we can keep moving it forward. Thank you. The next item that we have is number 5. We received a memo from the USEAP, Utah Special Education Advisory Panel, regarding systems change for meaningful inclusion. I think Lea Voorhees is going to talk to us about that.
Thank you, Chair. I'm Lea Voorhees, the Assistant Superintendent of Student Support. I'm so happy to be with you. Thank you for a few minutes of your time to present this recommendation to you. To give committee members, mostly member straight for you, since all the other board members have received USEAP recommendations before. The Utah Special Education Advisory Panel is an advisory panel to the board that's actually required by the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act and by your Rule 277-750. That is made up of all stakeholders, and 51% of the participants on the panel must be parents. The panel is very active, and the members of the panel are very engaged, and I am honored to be your liaison to the USEAP. So USEAP meets about every other month. The first meeting of each year, USEAP sets priorities for discussion for the rest of the year. They review data. They review promising practice recommendations if as a committee the board related to those priority topics. This particular recommendation is about systems change to support meaningful inclusion of all students with disabilities. And the way they have structured this memo was to present 4 barriers that they identified through reviewing the special, talking to several LEA representatives in the state, and reviewing a comprehensive survey that the Utah Education Policy Center does for the State Board of Education about teacher retention patterns, whether or not teachers stay in the profession, leave the profession, move from one LEA to another, or move from one school to another over a span of 5-year period. It's called the ECAPS survey, and the Utah Education Policy Center has been providing that for the State Board of Education for several years now. So the panel reviewed all of this data, identified 4 barriers to systems that make it difficult for meaningful inclusion of students with disabilities, and then provided 4 possible solutions to those systems. And one of them fits beautifully with the question that Board Member Cannon asked at the very beginning of our meeting about if teachers, general education teachers, have the knowledge and skill that they need to be able to provide meaningful, inclusive opportunities for students with disabilities. So I present this memo to you for your consideration. I'd also like you to know that we're very lucky that the chair of USEEP, Summer Gunn, and the co-chair of USEEP, Stephen Phelps, ask them a question or address and willing to engage with you. That is my presentation of the USEEP memo. And if there are any questions, I'm open to them now. Thank you.
Thank you. It looks like Board Member Earl has her hand up. You have a question, Jenny?
Yeah, or at least a thought. I just, I mean, this is where the term inclusion comes from, right? From the special education specifically. I wondered is this training meant to be for all students? It says all children, so I guess all children with disabilities. And I guess that was my question, because, all right, never mind. I answered my own question. I just wanted to make sure we were being inclusive of all children. I read this the other day, but all this other data got in the way, so I should have just looked over. Thank you. That's what I was searching for.
Do we have any other questions? In looking at the recommendations, I think that barrier number 1 is one that we're addressing with our previous motion to the board to get some information on training. So we're starting into that. But Janet, you had something? I'm losing connection.
Sorry, I couldn't find my unmute button. Is my hand up?
I just thought it was my internet that was causing the problem.
No, I moved my unmute thing over off the page so I can see my notes on the meeting. I apologize for being slow. I didn't have a comment after all that.
Okay. If there are no, Jenny, you
still
got your hand.
I have one.
Yep.
Just one more comment, and this is about specifically related to our data on areas that we saw a higher need with emotional, help me with the terminology that, was it emotional disturbances? I don't know if I've got that terminology right. Is there training, are we hoping to include training specific to that area or these other areas? I'm sure you saw the data of specific needs, or do we have that available?
Chair, may I respond?
Please.
Yes, we do have that available, and very similar response to the response I gave earlier this morning about students with autism, students that need behavior support, students that need emotional regulation support, any kind of emotional disability. The State Board of Education has both training and technical assistance available.
Thank you. I love how we're very responsive to what's needed in the schools and around us. So thank you, Lea.
Okay, I don't see any other hands up. I'd ask maybe Deputy Superintendent Norman if you could put up a we've got a proposed motion for this one.
I will. Let me share my screen again. And
And then if one of our committee members would like to make that motion or another one, we're open for that.
okay, can you see it now?
No, not
Okay,
on.
let me do it again. Let me try again.
I think Janet has hers pulled up. Oh, there we go.
Are you seeing it now?
Yes.
I move that the Standards and Assessment Committee forward a recommendation to the board to accept for consideration the recommendations in the UC memo, Systems Change for Meaningful Inclusion.
Okay, we have a motion before the committee that the Standards and Assessment Committee forward a recommendation to the board to accept for consideration the recommendations in the UC memo, Systems Change for Meaningful Inclusion. Is there any discussion to the motion? I don't see any hands. If not, let's go ahead and vote. And it appears that the committee's unanimous on that motion. So thank you, everyone. I think we've hit our time limit.
Point of order.
Yes, please.
I don't think that we gave direction back for our access committee, that I think that staff could direct that we have requested more information to continue to study their recommendations.
I'm sorry, just to relay that back to the access committee.
Please, if the committee agrees.
Okay, I think that we can just direct staff to do that informally and make sure that gets back. I imagine many members of access committee are viewing what we're doing today, and please understand that we are moving in a good direction and we are going to do good things for our kids. I know that we're not moving as quickly as some people would like us to, but we want to make sure we do this right. So thank you, everyone. Appreciate your time today.
Thanks.
See you.
Thank you.